Well, that's the longest introduction I've ever given anybody on this show.
I know.
How are you?
For decades, she said nothing. No interviews, no memoir chapters, not even a passing nod in the glittering blur of red carpets and talk shows, while the world wrote their own stories, while tabloids speculated and fans wondered. Ann-Margret chose silence, a silence that, for over half a century, shielded one of the most private relationships in Hollywood history. But now, at 84 years old, she's finally ready to speak. Not to expose, not to embellish, and certainly not to cash in, but to remember. With grace, with honesty, and with the kind of quiet reverence that makes you lean in and hold your breath, because what she reveals about Elvis Presley isn't what you might expect. He wasn't just the king. He wasn't just the hips and the headlines. To her, he was something else entirely, something far more human and far more fragile. He made me laugh, she says. He made me feel seen. This isn't the kind of confession you hear for ratings. It's the kind that only comes when a lifetime has passed and the noise of the world has faded. It's the kind that doesn't ask for judgment, only understanding. And so for the first time, Ann-Margret lets us in, not to rewrite history, but to show us the pieces of it no one ever saw, the late-night phone calls, the laughter behind locked doors, the flowers with no card. And it begins not with a scandal, but with a silence finally breaking, long before the cameras, before the Vegas lights and screaming fans, before her name was stitched into marquees beside Elvis Presley's. She was just a little girl named Ann-Margret Olsen, growing up in a tiny village tucked deep within the snowy forests of Sweden. The winters were long. The nights were quiet, and the stars above her home were the only ones she knew. Born in 1941, Ann-Margret's earliest memories weren't of stages or spotlights, but of pine trees bending in the wind and the hum of her mother's lullabies. Her family had little, but what they lacked in wealth, they made up for in warmth. It was a simple life, honest, pure. Then at just 5 years old, everything changed. Her mother packed their few belongings and boarded a ship bound for America, to reunite with her father, who had found work in Chicago. For Ann-Margret, it was the start of a journey that would stretch far beyond anything she could imagine. Chicago was loud, busy, unfamiliar, but she adapted. Quickly, there was something in her, a quiet resilience, a spark beneath the surface. By the time she reached her teens, that spark had become impossible to ignore. She danced like she was born to it, sang with a voice that felt too large for any one room. And when she enrolled at Northwestern University, her professors took notice. She wasn't just talented, she was electric. One stage led to another, one song led to a spotlight, and before long, Hollywood came calling. But here's what most people don't realize. Ann-Margret never chased fame. It found her. She only ever chased the feeling, the music, the movement, the magic. And in those early years, as the world began to discover her, she had no idea that her path would soon cross with a man whose voice could shake stadiums, and whose presence would leave a permanent mark on her soul. But that part of the story was still years away. For now, she was just a girl with fire in her feet, hope in her heart, and a name the world had yet to. Hollywood was watching. America was watching. And from the moment Viva Las Vegas began filming in 1963, it was clear this wasn't just another movie. Something else was happening. Something unscripted. Something unscripted. Elvis Presley, already a global phenomenon, walked onto that set with the swagger of a legend and the pressure of a myth. Ann-Margret arrived as the new sensation, a flame rising fast with talent that couldn't be ignored. What happened when they met wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't planned. It just sparked. From their first scene together, the chemistry was electric. Not the kind a director can choreograph, not the kind a studio can manufacture. It was raw, playful, magnetic. On screen, they flirted, danced, collided. Off-screen, the lines blurred. They laughed between takes, whispered when the cameras cut. There were glances that lasted too long, smiles that held more than words ever could. But what most people couldn't see, was what happened when the lights went down and the world stopped watching. That's where the real connection lived. In the silences, in the stolen moments between scenes, in the shared weight of fame neither of them fully trusted. Elvis, though adored by millions, was surrounded by walls, his image tightly controlled. His world managed to the inch. Ann-Margret, fresh to the chaos, understood that pressure more than anyone. They were in many ways kindred. Both young, both famous, both aching for something real in a world made of make-believe. someone who didn't want anything from the other except the truth. To the outside world, Viva Las Vegas was a hit, a fun, flashy musical. But what happened off-set would never be captured on film. Because some performances are private. Some stories never make it to the credits, and this was one of them. They were never seen holding hands in public. No red carpet appearances, no love letters leaked to the press. Their connection lived in the quiet, in stolen glances, late-night laughter, and the silence between spotlights. Elvis was with Priscilla. That fact never changed. And for Ann-Margret it mattered. She never tried to interfere, never spoke a word against her. Not then. Not now, because what she and Elvis shared wasn't built on betrayal, it was built on understanding. Behind closed doors, their time together was tender. He made her laugh, deep belly laughs that lingered into the night. She brought him calm, a place where he didn't have to perform. They danced together, not for the cameras, but for each other. And when the music stopped, they sat in silence that felt more intimate than any stage could offer. But Ann-Margret knew the truth. This love, as real as it was, could never have a future. Not with the weight Elvis carried, not with the image he was bound to protect. So she made the choice. She walked away, not because she didn't love him, but because she did, enough to let him go with grace. Even as the tabloids circled and the years passed, she held the memories close, not out of shame, but respect. And that's what makes this love story different, because sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones we choose not to shout. Years passed. Roles came and went. Ann-Margret's star continued to rise, awards, accolades, standing ovations. And though their relationship had quietly ended, something remained. Something wordless, something unmistakably his. Every time she opened a new show in Las Vegas, whether it was 1967, 1975, or even into the 1980s, they were there, a bouquet, always the same. Dozens of fresh flowers carefully arranged in the shape of a guitar. No note, no card, no sender's name. But she didn't need one. She knew. Everyone close to her knew. Only one person had ever given her flowers like that. Only one man used silence as a language. It became a ritual, quiet, consistent, deeply personal. While the crowd cheered and the curtain rose, backstage stood a message more powerful than applause. I remember you. I still care. I'm still watching. The guitar, the symbol of Elvis himself, wasn't just a tribute. It was a promise that what they shared hadn't been forgotten. That even though their paths had diverged, the emotion had not disappeared. She never spoke of it publicly. Never displayed them for attention. She would receive the bouquet, smile gently, and place it in her dressing room. A soft, sacred reminder of a bond that existed outside of headlines. And when Elvis passed away in 1977, the flowers stopped. Just once, just long enough to feel the absence. And then, strangely, quietly, they began again. One final bouquet, same shape, same silence, delivered to her door in the days after his funeral. This time she wept, because even in death, Elvis Presley had found a way to say goodbye, not through a speech, not through a song, but through the only language they'd ever really needed, a gesture. A guitar made of roses, a memory wrapped in petals. And for Ann-Margret, that bouquet said everything. The world often defines women by the men they once loved. But Ann-Margret never let herself be reduced to a chapter in someone else's story. Not even Elvis's. After their paths diverged, she didn't fall apart. She evolved. Her career surged forward, not as a starlet, but as an actress to be reckoned with. She shattered expectations with roles in Carnal Knowledge and Tommy, earning Oscar nominations and critical respect. She lit up Vegas stages like a force of nature, riding motorcycles in sequin bodysuits, defying every idea of how a woman was supposed to age in show business. But behind all the sparkle, Ann-Margret lived a life anchored in something rare: devotion. In 1967, she married actor Roger Smith, and while the tabloids waited for cracks to show, none ever came. Roger wasn't just her husband. He became her manager, her partner, her protector. He stepped back from his own rising career to support hers, and she in turn stood by him through his decades-long battle with a debilitating neuromuscular disease. They stayed side by side for 50 years through sickness, silence, and spotlight, not because it was glamorous, but because it was real. And through it all, Ann-Margret remained fiercely private. She never sold stories, never played into scandal, never used her past with Elvis to prop up her present. That kind of restraint, that grace, is almost unheard of in Hollywood. Oh, almost unheard of. While others built brands on heartbreak and tell-alls, she built a legacy on loyalty. Loyalty to her husband, loyalty to herself, and quietly still, loyalty to the memory of a man she once loved. Few lived with this much quiet grace. Fewer still walked away from their most whispered about chapter, not bitter, not broken, but whole. Because Ann-Margret didn't need headlines to validate her life. She had already lived it, on her terms, with a heart that remembered but never wavered. It took her a lifetime to speak, not because she was afraid, but because some stories are too sacred to share until they've had time to settle, to soften, to become something more than memory. At 84, Ann-Margret finally found the words, not for fame, not for headlines, but for him. She doesn't speak of Elvis Presley as the king, the icon with rhinestones and a roaring crowd. She speaks of Elvis the man who made her laugh in dressing rooms, who danced with her in slippers behind closed doors, who called her when the loneliness got too loud, he had a soul full of music and pain, and she says softly, a kind, gentle, silly when no one else was watching. She remembers how he lit up a room, how his presence could pull gravity, but she also remembers how quickly that light could dim. How when the curtain fell and the fans disappeared, Elvis would retreat into himself, quieter, sadder, searching. They never got to say goodbye properly. There was no grand ending, just time and distance, and a truth they both carried in silence. Her voice doesn't waver when she speaks now, but there's something in her eyes, a shimmer, a memory flickering just behind them. She doesn't dwell on what could have been. She doesn't indulge in regret. Instead, she speaks with gratitude for the time they had and for the love that, however brief, was real. No bitterness, no scandal, just grace. In an industry built on reinvention, Ann-Margret never tried to rewrite history. She never diminished Priscilla, never exaggerated her own place in his life. She simply remembered, and held that remembrance like a fragile keepsake, hers alone until now. What she shares isn't explosive, it's honest, and in that honesty lies the power. Because when she speaks of Elvis, it's not about the fame or the songs or the myth, it's about the man behind it all. The one who sent flowers shaped like guitars, the one who made her feel seen, the one who, in a different world, in a different life, might have been more than a chapter. But sometimes the chapter is enough. Sometimes a love that doesn't last still leaves something eternal. As she tells it, the story feels less like a revelation and more like a love letter, one written in silence, one sealed with time, and now finally read aloud, not to stir the past, but to honor it, because the truest stories aren't always shouted. Sometimes they're whispered decades later by a woman who finally decided to let the world in.